Andrew Urquhart with you on the program today as a representative of the news media, or what's left of it, I suppose, with the, somewhat shock announcement last week. I'd say definitely a shock announcement of the collapse of Newshub. Basically, Bugs Bunny pulls the plug on 50% of our television news media in New Zealand. What does this mean for not just the media and for those familiar faces and their jobs and their careers, but what does it mean for freedom of the press and freedom of speech here in New Zealand? Joining us on the program, CEO of the Free Speech Union, Jonathan Ayling. Kia ora. Good morning. How are you?
Very good morning, sir.
Firstly, were you surprised? Was it a surprise shock announcement for you, or do you think this is just karma? This is just chickens coming home to roost, as it were?
I think it can be both those things. The media industry is in trouble in New Zealand. Internationally, there are some challenging headwinds that are facing the fourth estate, and so in reality, these sorts of announcements are not entirely surprising. It is unlikely that that we won't have a few similar announcements made this year with regards to some other outfits like Stuff, who are also
Yep.
struggling. But at the same time, it is also a little bit challenging and surprising because exactly as you've said, a major outlet, 300 jobs, that's big news.
It is big news, but it comes in some ways not necessarily a causal link here. You may choose to make one, but a declining public trust in media and an increasing disconnection between the views of the Fourth Estate and the views of the general public. And if I can take the next step, perhaps even a disdain by the Fourth Estate for the views of the general public. Is that too much of a stretch in your opinion, Jonathan?
Well, I would hesitate to suggest that that media like talking about nothing more than themselves
Yeah.
quite often. And so over the past week or so, we've seen really as many opinions on why this has occurred as commentators out there.
Yeah.
And certainly one of the explanations is the culture war narrative that suggests that media are out of touch with large portions of New Zealand society, who in reality, with their eyes and with their purchasing of products that are advertised on these outlets, pay in order for this coverage to be provided.
Yeah.
I think there has to be some view given to that, and some explanation accepted that there is a disconnect emerging within those that consume a lot of this media and those that provide it. And that's not just my opinion. A decline in trust has been tracked for quite some time now by Auckland University of Technology. And over the past 5 years, there's just been a consistent drop every year for most outlets actually, but including Newshub.
Yeah.
And I would say that has to be part of the equation. My question, Andrew, is really, are we going whether this is the state now because an outlet is closing, or whether this has been the state for some time, I'm not sure is really that pertinent. The question is, what are we going to do about it at this stage? And Winston Peters said this is a disaster for democracy. I was surprised even to see the Taxpayers Union come out with a similar line saying that by undermining media plurality and a diversity within the media sector, that this is bad for our democratic conversations.
Can we just roll back a little bit? Because
I really agree.
For the Deputy Prime Minister, whose disdain for media generally is well documented, for him to say that a media outlet closing is bad news, that in itself should be the major headline of the day. This is the same media who says, well, we just won't report anything he says if he's not going to toe the line. I mean, certainly things were a little bit out of kilter just a few months back in that regard.
A few months back, last week opened
exactly
with revelations that Mark Jennings, the newsroom editor, was having conversations with other senior editors of other media outlets. I can only assume it's quite possible that Newshub was amongst them, whether they should cover the comments that Winston Peters was making. Sorry, who? The Deputy Prime Minister. This isn't that Winston has a right to coverage in and of himself. It's that through our democratic process and through the election, he has been given a very significant position, and that office deserves respect and deserves to be considered part of the public discourse. I would say that there's kind of two ways of viewing this:
Yep.
the abstract and the hypothetical, and then the reality of this as well. In the abstract and the hypothetical, Winston Peters is absolutely correct. I would say the Taxpayers Union is largely correct as well. Removing an outlet that is providing options, alternatives, it's providing different perspectives from a media landscape is not good news for plurality and diversity. It's not good for free speech and the ability to access opinions that maybe challenge you or maybe affirm you or provide you with a different perspective.
Yep.
That's kind of the theoretical defense of the role of the fourth estate. On the other hand, though, what has any of that got to do with Newshub? Because I'm not sure how much of that was actually occurring anyway.
Yep.
And so hypothetically, yes, a media outlet being removed from a media ecosystem is bad news for that plurality or diversity of views. And for whatever reason you want to ascribe to it, I'm not going to say it was just because, they were super woke and only reporting certain narratives.
Yep.
But I don't think they were offering very much that was very different from TVNZ.
I mean, having said that, though, a monopoly is always bad news from an economic point of view. The service goes down, the cost goes up, and particularly when the only TV news service on offer is the one which essentially is owned by the government but doesn't seem accountable to taxpayers, that's not good news for anybody.
No, and there needs to be a conversation around the way state-funded media works here. The Free Speech Union doesn't have a position that state-funded media is necessarily a problem. But what we have seen consistently over some time, and certainly over the past 6 years of the previous government, not least because of the role of Willie Jackson, a continual blurring of the lines between the editorial independence of media outlets that are funded by the government and the government's position and priorities as well. Those two things should be entirely unrelated. And unfortunately, I think trust in the media has been further damaged by, if not willful intentions to conflate those two things, at least indifference to perceived conflations of those two things.
Speaking of indifference, current Broadcast Minister Melissa Lee was more of a meh moment when confronted with the fact that thousands of New Zealand journalists were going to be losing their jobs.
51. Let's not inflate Newshub's influence too much.
Okay.
51 journalists,
typical
300
journalists, right?
No, I think there was general surprise at the way she responded to that, and I think maybe her staff were even a little bit surprised, and it did seem that as the story continued to unfold, her tone became increasingly concerned in order to show that this is an important conversation, and it really is. But there are a lot of people exploring this both in New Zealand and overseas, and the bottom line, in my opinion, is that if we have a disdainful elitist view, that will come through in the way we seek to communicate with others. And free speech is an incredibly humble enterprise. It accepts that that we don't know everything, that we've got some things wrong, we just don't know which of those things are at the moment. And that's what free speech does. It invites everyone into that conversation to contribute, and a whole lot of people don't have much to contribute, but again, we don't know which of those people are. And so it opens the field up for us to be able to explore this. It's an iterative process, and my surprise is that there seems to be a total lack of self-awareness amongst many journalists as to the way their commentary on certain views and certain perspectives actually contributes to distrust or just disregard for the role of this media. And in our modern age, while sure we don't have other television news, I don't think Rhema has it on the plans at the moment to do a 6 o'clock broadcast. But through Substack, a great Kiwi invention that has taken the world. I think it's another example of Kiwi ingenuity, or many other outlets like that. Citizen journalism is growing as well, and so it's not all at a loss. I think we just need to have a view to the core values that actually have enabled things like a free press to do remarkable work to enable accountability and transparency, and possibly, if we dare want to put this out there, an exploration of truth. And if we return to some of these basic values, I don't think that media has to be doomed forever, but it will require a little bit of humility, not least of all on the part of the journalists that at the moment seem quite disinclined towards that.
It does. There does seem to be, and this certainly predates the announcement from last week, a changing view of the role of media in society, and most of that is within the media. Seem to have a changing view of the role of media within society, but hey, that's perhaps a conversation for another time. Jonathan, appreciate the work you do. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Andrew. Cheers.
Thanks for joining us on Rhema. Now, if you found value in today's content, hit that like button. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing to our channel with the subscribe button. This really helps us to continue to produce more quality content for you. And hey, if you'd like to stay updated and never miss any of our future videos, ring that notification bell as well. Don't forget to follow us on our other socials, which are in the description below. And until then, stay tuned.